All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Upward Spiral podcast. And I am thrilled with our guest today, who is Eva Minkoff, and I'm going in a bit to introduce her. But before I do, I just wanted to talk about a fundraiser you may or may not have seen me post about and talk about. So, for those of you who don't know, I am the vice president for NAMI, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, in Orange County, New York, which provides free mental health resources to our community. And for the first time in Orange County, New York, we're going to be hosting NAMI Walks, which is a walk to fundraise for our wonderful NAMI in Orange County, New York. So you can find out more about it at namiwalks.org/Orange, New York. And I'll post a link in the show notes so you don't have to remember to memorize that. But I think it's a wonderful organization that provides many resources regarding mental health to communities really across the country. So please, if you're in the area, would love to have you. It's on September 1st at 9 a.m. Or if you'd like to donate, it'd be wonderful. So thank you. All right, so let's get started. So Eva famously is a TEDx speaker whose speech was titled 5 Minutes to Fix Our Broken Healthcare System. And we're going to be talking about that today because it was truly an amazing talk. She is also director of healthcare relationship initiatives at Medicine Forward and is an impact coach for healthcare decision makers. So Eva, hello and welcome. Anything you'd like to add?
Thank you so much for having me on today. Really is a privilege to be here and helping you start getting the ball rolling with this podcast. So thank you so much for putting it together. Just a little to add on my bio, if you will, is a little bit of my background. And I tend to like to mention this because it's a bit of a bizarre background. I'm not a physician. I'm not like just a patient advocate, but I've touched on almost every corner of healthcare, every aspect of healthcare in sort of bizarre ways. I mean, I studied neuropsychology and nutrition science and had several clinical and research internship roles through that. But then I decided not to become a clinician. I founded a health tech startup. Then I worked at several health tech startups. I led communities of tens of thousands of people with chronic illnesses. And then I worked in healthcare marketing and media. So, and there's like gaps to fill in there too that I participated in. And that's my professional bio, if you will, in a nutshell, but possibly, definitely as importantly, if not more importantly, is my personal bio and relationship to healthcare. And that is as a patient, I was undiagnosed for 20 years. I've now been diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, fibromyalgia, mast cell activation syndrome, and POTS. Those things love to come together. So that was quite a journey, to say the least. And then I ended up marrying a physician, and I met him 6 weeks into residency. So I think that says a lot right there. And honestly, I was an advocate, if you want to put that title on it. I was an advocate for doctors and patients before I met him. It was through my journey, and both professionally and personally, that I saw this great disconnect, which I guess we'll talk about if we're going to talk about the TED Talk. Uh, but it was once I met my husband and really saw what he was going through that I understood on a whole new level what was missing and also what was possible.
Wow.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah.
I know we were going to speak about the TEDx talk, but I wanted to ask you the time leading up to until you got the diagnoses for all those different things. What was that like for you? What kind of symptoms were you having? What kind of answers were you getting when you were going to the doctors? And what was that experience like?
Thank you for asking. So I think to summarize, and it's what led me to the talk really, is that I was having a mixed bag of chronic symptoms. I mean, if you know anything about those ailments, some of which were considered rare. I don't actually think they're really rare anymore. Uh, I mean, they look like they're all over the place. The fact that Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, a connective tissue disorder, comes along with mast cell activation, which looks like allergic reactions all the time, and POTS, which looks like fainting all the time. I mean, why are those related? Honestly, clinically, I still don't really know, and I'm not sure we do. But they're all invisible, with the exception of if you have mast cell reactions. And I got all of these, or they started rearing their ugly head when I was a teenager. And not only was I a teenage girl, I was a teenage girl ballet dancer, like a very serious ballet dancer. I mean, it was my life. And
Wow.
so people attributed that to me being a drama queen. And also, if anyone who knows about the ballet world, it honestly reminds me a lot of residency and fellowship and maybe just attending hood. Like it is where resilience gets a bad name. Like you got to push through.
Right.
That's the dark side of that word. And there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And especially and that's even if you have something visible going on. But for me, to them, it was like the boy who cried wolf. No one really thought I was experiencing what I was experiencing. I'm not sure until my pregnancy a couple of years ago that my dad really fully believed what I was experiencing.
Wow.
And I know he loves me and he's very supportive, but he's one of those guys that like needs proof. He needs to see it. So I could say many, many more things about this, but that at least was my experience as a patient in terms of my symptoms and how they presented. But just quickly, in terms of my relationship with doctors, either people said in some way, we don't have a diagnosis for you, or they gave me one that didn't really make any sense. Like I was diagnosed with spondylitis at one point. I have no idea how that came to be. And the way they handled that information, the way that they either delivered the information or just the journey, it had such a massive impact on my experience. And I imagine in turn with them, it's going back now, it's hard to see. I was young, right? Like I was really only reflecting on my experience at that point. I'll give you an example. The first specialist experience I remember, it was at where was it? Columbia Presbyterian. I mean, fantastic hospital. It's going to be a top doc pediatric rheumatologist. And I told him I was a very serious ballet dancer. And he said, well, why don't you stop dancing? I mean, you seem to be in a lot of pain, so maybe you should just stop. And would that maybe have been a good idea? Perhaps, I'm not sure. But that aside, he completely disregarded the fact that it was my life.
Right.
And I made that very clear to him, by the way. I wouldn't just say, oh, I do ballet sometimes.
Right.
And he had just no recognition of this being a big part of my identity, what brought me happiness. And even though I'm sure he meant well, that was the first time I recognized that relationship mattered and understanding the patient, me in that instance, mattered.
Right.
I think that really highlights, part of that talk that you gave, which again was phenomenal, where you were talking about the survey study that you were doing, and you were speaking to patients and asking them all those different criteria of their life, rating the importance, right? So that, and you said to the audience, imagine if your doctor, knew you better than your best friend, because that patient said to you that you now knew her better than her own best friend, right? And that struck me. And you do talk about the different sides of things, the patient perspective and the doctor perspective, because you did speak to both to see kind of, that the patients felt that the doctors didn't spend enough time with them. The doctors felt that the patients didn't appreciate the limited time that they had for them. However, that again, and this is coming from a doctor, and I'm sure that Gia will agree, even though doctors, because of our healthcare system, do have less time with their patients, that doesn't take away from the importance of that information that you were gathering in that survey to what a doctor and every provider needs to do, right?
Right.
We're taught that in medical school of all these important things. We don't teach in medical school, just find out why they're there and give them something and send them on their way out, right?
Sure.
These are factors, we call them psychosocial factors, that we teach our medical students, that you need to learn about your patient, right? Their hobbies, their interests, what's important to them, their family life, everything, recent stressors, recent things. That's all a part of learning about your patient, building trust and building rapport and properly treating them. I mean, that's what stuck out to me, rather, when I saw that part of your talk. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, G.
I was just thinking, like, you need context, right? I'm imagining you as like a teenager, you're relying on your parents to bring you there. And like you said, all these different things, you can't see them. So you're telling your parents, I'm hurting, like all this, I'm having all these different symptoms. I can imagine how frustrating that would be. And then your dad didn't believe it. Did your mom was in the picture? She believed you?
She could tell I was in pain. She didn't know what was going on. So I think the extent, I wouldn't say she didn't believe me. She believed me, but I think it was still a big question mark for her too. She just
Yeah.
knew something was wrong. So
Yeah.
at least there was that.
Right. I would imagine outside of her depth, right? She was just doing the best that she could. And then you're in this competitive world of ballet and you're pushing yourself, I would imagine pushing yourself to kind of the limits of your abilities. You want to advance. And then you're kind of like have this battle going on.
Yeah. I was reflecting the other day with someone on a particular moment in time where I think the game changed for me in terms of how I was perceived at ballet and maybe myself. And that was when I had a vertigo. I still to this day don't know why I got vertigo, but I had it for a few weeks, like on and off each day. And vertigo, you can't dance.
Yeah.
You can't
Can't
do
do much with
pirouettes.
vertigo. Can't do
Right.
much. Stand up is like a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, I walked and I would just like fall over. And that's something you really can't see. And you wouldn't even see, quote unquote, me in pain, because it's not exactly pain. And I remember after like my fellow dancers looking at me a certain way with confusion and disapproval, or at least that's how I was perceiving it. And honestly, the environment after that changed for me. And so it sent me this message that whoever I was without wanting to trying was wrong. And I got that from my peers. I got that at home to an extent. I got that from my doctors. I haven't had some of the typical medical trauma, but that wasn't not traumatic and absolutely has shaped who I am today. One of the ways, and this is not an uncommon thing if you ask people with invisible chronic illnesses, I feel like I have to talk about it a lot. Like I have to tell my husband, who very much believes me and is on my side in every way, I have to voice when I'm feeling something because I still feel like people don't believe me. It's really annoying for him.
I know, but these are because I agree with you because these are some of the things that you're unfortunately having to deal with are, as you mentioned, kind of invisible, right? In a way, we're invisible, meaning that we haven't, in my opinion, developed the test that's going to diagnose that yet. That's all. Because I think technology will eventually catch up with some of these things. But at the end of the day, something that is important for anyone in the healthcare field is to validate how your patient is feeling instead of worrying so much about needing to put a title to a diagnosis to your patient, right? That shouldn't be as equally important. Should be the most important, how your patient is feeling, right? It's easy to, you came into that doctor's office, right? You have someone who is in a very competitive field in terms of sports, and they're coming in with pain. The easy for the doctor to treat diagnosis is just stop what you're doing, right? Now I can go on and see my next patient because that's easy. That boom, it's done, right? The harder diagnoses are the ones that you have to do a workup for, right? But it's easier to grasp at that, right? But I do think part of this, again, I'll go back to, is because in large part the pressure on all providers of having to squeeze in so many patient encounters, not being able to really sit there with their patients and really hear more about how they're feeling and get to know them more. I think all providers are reacting a little differently to that. Some are more frustrated, some are more like, okay, well, then I'm just going to do whatever time you give me to do, and that's pretty much it. And I'll blame it on that, right? Unfortunately.
Or I'll spend more time and then get frustrated because I'm behind on all my notes and I'm like 4 patients behind and they're waiting.
Right.
That was my model. Like I would be like, because I want it, once I'm in a conversation, I want to know what's going on. Like I'm going to start asking all the questions. I want to know what's going on with your kids, all
Yeah.
these different things. And then all of a sudden you have like 5 people waiting and the notes are piling up and all this stuff. So it's like that constant battle.
Oh, I had the nurse knocking on my door when I was a patient. I'm sorry. I'm the same way like G. I mean, we train together, right? We want to get to know our patients. You can't, this isn't like a revolving door where you just push patients in and out. I don't think you can effectively treat patients that way. So I love what you're doing, and I love everything you spoke about in your TED talk, because I say this often. I think sometimes we find a passion, but I think sometimes a passion finds us. And I think through your chronic illnesses, you found this passion to highlight connections and how important they are, and relationships, and they are, especially in the healthcare field, right? Because these are patient lives. So I was just wondering, I can see kind of, I think you've spoken a bit about it, but what truly led you to say, hey, I need to do this talk. I want to talk about all of this. Because really it was so profound. I just wondering what brought you to that point.
Hmm. You know, I'm trying to remember what got me there. So at the time, I was working on that health tech startup that I vaguely mentioned in the talk, and it was a matching platform for doctors and patients. It was modeled after like Match.com and OkCupid.
Yeah.
And I did that because I saw, especially for the chronic illness community, and I would say mental health community, actually, finding the right provider, the right, whether it be doctor or otherwise, I mean, it's imperative. It's makes or breaks your care in a lot of instances. And it took me a while to realize that that platform came from going back to the TED Talk. I mentioned that the study from the TED Talk was when I was in college. It was an accidental study. I kind of happened upon it. And that was like a 7-year gap there, but it had always been in the back of my mind. Like I remember saying once or twice every year, I was like, I really want to revisit that study. Like there's something to it, the messaging. And I want to put it out there. If anyone watches this talk, I don't really care that much about the exact tool that I talk about. It's really the concept behind it, which I would like to tap into. And so I'll be very frank. I had an investor, and they said, I think you should do a TED talk because you're a great presenter and you're very passionate. And he said, tell me right now, if you had a TED talk, what would it be on? Like he literally snapped and said, tell me. And I just went on about this and basically gave the talk to him. And he went, oh, okay. I guess
There
you
it
do
is.
have a message to spread. And so that's really how it came about. And I found, I just found the right event, the right TED event to do it at, is the long story short there. But something, if it's all right, I'd like to unpack a little bit. We were talking about the time in the appointment and how we want to spend more time with our patients. So I have further distinguished the difference between gathering information and human connection. And they're both linked they're both what we want to accomplish in that appointment. And I have lots to say on how we can gather information more effectively, but I'd actually just like to stop at the human connection station for a second. That's where time can be very, very minimal. It really takes very little time and effort, quite frankly, to connect with another human. And human connection is called human connection because it's about being human with one another. I mean, we all have the same basic needs and desires, like love and belonging and safety. I don't care where you live, what your experiences have been. That's something we all have in common. It can look a little different, but the baseline experiences is how we can all relate to one another. And so, Mike, you were talking about validation earlier. That is something that provides us a sense of love, belonging, and safety, just validation alone. And validation can also just show up as saying, like, I hear you, like, I hear you're in pain. Even if, let's say someone was, I don't know if hypochondriac is a term that people use anymore, but if that is, let's say that was the case, that doesn't mean that something isn't wrong in that scenario. Maybe something clinically is not wrong or that severe, but something's going on with that patient where they are at dis-ease. Something is going on where they need to be validated. They need to feel that they are safe and they are cared for and guided through that. So yes, especially when you're dealing with a specialist, perhaps they cannot help you because it's outside their specialty, but that doesn't mean that they can't be validated in that moment and cared for and supported. That's what I noted on my journey, my very long journey of God knows how many doctors. I could have had 2 doctors say or give me the exact same general message of, I don't have a diagnosis for you. And the way in which they did that and supported me through that and validated me through that, or didn't, it really just made all the difference. Like, I remember them very vividly in my mind for different reasons. And this is true in healthcare, but it's also just true in our lives. Like, I mean, I don't want to spiral out of this, but we're just talking about people here. It's just 2 people with different expertise and different understanding of a situation.
I love that. And to think about it, right? Some of these illnesses, like one that you mentioned for yourself, fibromyalgia, right? By not validating the symptoms, which are real symptoms, right? Well, doctor, no, these are real symptoms. You're actually worsening the disease process, because one of the etiologies that we think are part of fibromyalgia, besides this hyperactivation of nociceptive pain receptors and all that stuff, basically, firing of more pain signaling than in others, are life stressors, right? That's part of it. And that's something that we treat for fibromyalgia, in addition to implementing exercise programs to help with fibromyalgia, and certain medications to help with the neuropathic pain we might think is involved and stuff like that, right? So by not validating your patient's symptoms, you're only worsening the disease process, right? And I love what you said, that there may not be something clinically, but the patient's still feeling something, right? For me, as long as a patient's not walking through the door and automatically demanding pain medications and telling me the type and the dose, and then I start getting suspicious for someone who might be seeking pain medications. If you're just coming in saying, doctor, I'm in pain, and that's all you've come in and said, and you just want to be validated, right? There should be no reason that doctor doesn't validate that person, because again, you're just worsening it for them and all the symptoms that they're experiencing. G, do you have anything to add to that?
I think your story is so profound, because I think that a lot of times, from like a doctor's perspective, you always feel like you need to have the answer. Like, you need to have an answer. Like, you're having pain, I need to have the solution to help fix whatever is going on for you. And when I was working in Chicago, I worked at the Integrative Medicine Center at Northwestern. And a lot of times we'd get all the patients that all the subspecialties wouldn't know what to do with, right? The rheumatologist, they've seen every doctor, and then they come to us. And I saw a lot of patients with exactly what you're saying, this like constellation of symptoms, the Ehlers-Danlos, the fibromyalgia, all these different things together, POTS, and nobody put it together. There was like some specialist that was able to, there was like somebody random, but it's like 1 in a million that was able to put it together. And it's like, where do you start to unravel all these things? And it could be overwhelming as a doctor. I was just starting my training. You feel like, oh my God, there's so much going on. I don't even know where to start. But I had to keep like reinforcing for myself, just be a human, like just listen. That's the first step. Let's build a relationship. This is the first step. And a lot of times you can figure out, a lot of times the patient is wise. They know what their body needs. And if you can just provide that safe space, like, I believe you, I trust you, I'm going to partner with you on this, and I'm going to, whatever you need, like, where do you think is the first place that you want to start? That's game changer. And
The patient always knows their body more than the doctor, right? That's what I think.
yeah, a lot of times most times they do.
Yeah,
I
right.
do like to say that there are 2 experts in the room, expert of the science and expert of their experience or their body. Maybe they don't understand how the body functions, but they understand their experience in their body.
That's right. That's right.
I feel so bad for pediatricians. My husband is a pediatric GI doctor, and he has to deal with kids trying to interpret what's going on with their bodies. Yikes.
It's a tough field. Yeah.
Yeah, it is a very tough field. I realize that the more time I spend with him, I'm like, wow, you have a really difficult job. He's GI. Yeah, so it's actually, Gina Marie, you said exactly what I wanted to share, which was the phrase, I believe you. Oh, I hear a little one.
Oh, sorry. That's my daughter babbling in the background. I apologize.
So sweet.
Yeah.
I have a 1.5-year-old, so my ears perk up, you know.
Aw.
So that phrase, I believe you, it almost brings tears to my eyes because I think about if any of my doctors had said that to me and how drastically that would have changed my experience and maybe even the trajectory of my care. I didn't believe myself sometimes, right? I don't know if anyone directly gaslit me. Perhaps I'm putting it behind me now, but I definitely felt like I must be crazy if no one else seems to think something's wrong with me and I'm seeing these top docs in New York City. Uh, so yeah, if someone didn't know what was wrong with me, okay. But if I just heard, I believe you, wow. And I mentioned this actually to my husband in the last year, let's say. And it might be, in my opinion, the most positive impact I've ever had on him because he now tells me that he says that to his patients. And that
Wow.
really, yeah, that made me so, it really just made me so happy because he doesn't know the ripple effect that he's going to have from just saying that. He also now feels very comfortable diagnosing people with fibromyalgia, which no one does in the Central Valley, apparently. So,
That's huge. That's
Yeah.
huge. And think about he's seeing kids, like what an incredible gift he's giving to them for them to be validated in what they're feeling from such a young age. Just to have one person that believes you and is like, listen, I believe you. I'm on this journey with you. I'm here. We're going to figure this out. We're going to find a way kind of forward. And that's what it's supposed to be.
yeah. And a lot of, I don't want to speak too much about his clinical experience, especially because it's not mine. But I think I can say that he sees a lot of kids with, let's say, unexplained belly pain, right? And I don't know what percentage, but a decent percentage come because of stress, and they don't know it's manifesting physically, of course, but maybe there's no actual other clinical diagnosis. Could be IBS, perhaps. And he makes it clear to them that I believe you're having this experience. Perhaps the solution might be family counseling that's going on, but that doesn't mean that that's not their experience, that they're not experiencing pain and that they don't deserve validation and attention, love, and support. And I imagine, I know for him, it can be very frustrating because, of course, he wants to solve them. He's at the end of the day, you guys are scientists, right? You're more than scientists, but you are scientists and you want to solve the problem. But you're scientists with heart and head uh, combined. And I don't know where I was going with this exactly, but I just want to take a second to acknowledge all doctors. Whoa, wow, what a job you have.
Thank you.
It's very much a mixed bag.
It's a mixed bag, yeah, for sure. When people say, "Oh, like doctor must have a great life," I'm like, "Woof." Do you should there are some high highs, low lows, but it is a mixed bag for sure.
You've been there since, right? What did you say? 6 weeks into residency?
Yeah, into his intern year,
Intern year, yeah.
and he told me all about med school. I'm kind of glad I didn't meet him during med school. Seemed like a disaster.
It's
Uh,
it's not
yeah.
easy.
No, and I have lots of friends who are doctors as well. So I learned about their experiences, and now I've developed such a close circle of people in the medical field, and it's been an honor to hear their experiences and then combine that with my knowledge of the chronic illness experience. And not just mine. I mean, like I said, I ran communities of tens of thousands of people with chronic illnesses, which includes a lot of patients who are very like anti doctor. And I've spoken to some where it doesn't matter what you say, like the door is closed, they've been traumatized and they can't see the goodness in doctors. And yeah, I would love to be able to have them see differently, but I'm a stand for both sides in both seeing the possibility in relationship and what can be done together rather in the silo. I don't think patients should be yelling over here and doctors should be yelling over here. I mean, we want the same things.
It's
We
so
are
true.
not each other's enemy.
So true. It's funny. Sorry, Mike, to cut you off.
Oh, please.
I exactly what you were saying is that the patients, like I've seen those patients that are really frustrated. And so they come in kind of like on fire and they're frustrated and they're angry and they come in almost with like an attitude. But it's like, if you can just like be present and just treat them like a human being. It was like amazing, almost like the shell cracks. And then under there is just a person who's like hurt and feels distrustful of the medical system and not sure if you're going to be able to help them or you're going to hurt them even more. And when you can just be that person that they feel like I can trust you. Like I feel like I can trust you. I can tell you what's going on and you're going to believe me. That has a profound impact on their health, but also on the trajectory of their life too.
So what I would add to that, G, I think it's a big part of why I do what I do. Part of what I do at Toro College of Osteopathic Medicine is I'm a standardized patient program coordinator. So standardized patients are basically, for those who don't know, are actors who act as patients for medical students. And so they can practice not only that physical examination, right, which is important that they learn, but also how to speak to patients, right? Interpersonal communication skills. And our standardized patients give our students feedback on a lot of the things that you just mentioned, Eva. And when you were saying all these things, I was like, oh, I wish my students were here. Students, you better be watching this right now, by the way.
Mandatory podcast.
Yeah, mandatory. No, but this is everything you said is so many of the things that our standardized patients tell them, we tell them, is what patients need, right? Is to be heard, right? Is to be validated. All these things that you said, I think were fantastic. And it's part of my job and why I do what I do. But I wanted to ask, for you, Eva, I agree with everything you're saying, 100%. But is there any part of this that you think is not on the doctor, but on the system?
Oh yeah, I think the majority of it is on the system, if not all in some ways. I mean, my belief and understanding is that most doctors and I think like 90 something percent of doctors get into medicine because they truly want to help people. And there is empathy present, either innately or taught, but it is stripped from doctors during their training because they have to survive, and or in the limited time. I mean, time is a huge factor, obviously. I have a lot to say on that. But then there's also the concept of moral injury, of course, which I'm learning a lot more about recently, and that doctors want to help their patients, but literally can't, whether because of prior authorization, which is a nightmare, or it's because there is that time constraint or a slew of other things. Doctors are basically set up to fail, in my opinion. And let's say they had all the time in the world. I don't know where that exists, but let's say there's all the time in the world and you're still having a doctor that's not demonstrating empathy and compassion and being human. Burnout is, I think that's one of the designated symptoms or of burnout, right? Is like a lack of human compassion. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the exact language there, right?
Yep.
But that's the vicious cycle, is that patients are upset with doctors for not treating them like humans, but doctors are, to wrap it up, burnt out, so they can't actually be human with you. No, I think very little of this is actually on the doctor. Sure, it might present itself as the doctor being at fault. I think very little of it is. You know what? I will say this is where I really don't like the word fault, but where I'll put it on the doctor, even though I understand this, is when they lose hope. So I've met many doctors who are, whether they're burned out, on the verge of burnout, or struggling. All of them are struggling. I don't know any doctor that is not struggling with this system unless they're completely removed from it. But they want better. They'd like to find a way. They're very open-minded if there's another way to go about something. And then I've met some doctors, even young ones, which really upsets me, that are just completely resigned to this situation. And they're like, this is where they get maybe the stereotype of like, they just want to make money and go home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was powerful. And it makes sense, right? The system leads to burnout. Burnout leads to lack of empathy for your patients. And then there you have it. The patients suffer. The patients suffer, the doctors suffer, and it starts at the system for sure. But yeah, I mean, of course, there's going to be individual instances where, because of that and the years and years of burnout, the doctors do lose hope, and that's probably the worst of it for sure. Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
I think I'd like Sorry if it's okay. Because I haven't brought this up yet, which is shocking to me because I tend to bring this up, and it is an element of my TED Talk. I think one of the best ways to better understand and therefore support our doctor-patient relationships is to look at them like they're romantic relationships without the obvious. And I use romantic instead of like friendships or other relationships, because romantic relationships we spend a lot of time and effort on, we care a lot about, and we look at them with under microscopes. These relationships are imperative to our happiness, and if we saw doctor-patient relationships the same way, I think it would be a complete game changer for how our system operates, even if the system itself did not change. Because we are the people within it, if we are there for each other during the hard times, let's say, that makes the experience completely different. So I use prior authorization as an example because, tell me if I'm wrong, has nothing to do with the doctor or the patient. That is definitely not at the fault of either of them, but they are given such an outrageous restriction or difficulty that could influence the patient possibly living or dying sometimes. And they're against this enemy together. But think about if you're in a marriage and, I don't know, the market crashes or something happens that has nothing to do with your relationship, but you're both burdened by it. Is it going to help if you're both arguing about it together or fighting at each other and putting the blame on the other person? No. You got to work together against this enemy. You got to be in partnership and there to support each other. And that definitely looks like communication. This is where it's part of the doctor's role is to communicate, like very clearly communicate. One, I validate your frustration and what you're going through. I'm doing everything I can. These are my limitations. Like, give them an idea of what you're dealing with as a doctor. The patient does not know. Most patients think doctors control everything, when we know you guys unfortunately have very little control when it comes to the system. You work within that system. You are a slave to that system. I hate saying that, but I know it's often the case. They don't know that. And then also the patient has to, one, recognize that, of course. And it's just, if we don't work in partnership with each other, nothing is going to work. Nothing's going to improve. And I also see it as a partial solution to everything that isn't directly about the relationship. So I don't have an answer here, but hypothetically, however we solve this prior authorization issue, like when it comes to legislation, perhaps, I don't know how we're going to do this, but I'll tell you, it's probably going to be done most efficiently if patients and doctors come at it together.
Right.
I love
That's
that.
exactly it. Even with the prior authorizations, a lot of times if we were in my office, weren't having any luck, I would tell the patient, like, again, we're on the same team. You call the insurance company because you're paying them money every month. Like they are indebted to you because you are a customer. And if we can both go at it and we can figure out a way, maybe we can find a way forward. But I love what you said about thinking about those relationships more as like an intimate relationship and how you would treat it. I feel like the doctor-patient relationship is often more of an acquaintance than it is actually like a true relationship, right? It's like, oh, hi. You don't really know your doctor. They don't really know you. And I was working with an endocrinologist who's a mentor of mine, and he's been in practice for over 30 years now. And he has patients who have literally been with him for like 25 years. And his diabetic patients come in every 3 months. And there's something beautiful about they know what about him, they know about his family, he knows about their family, he knows about their children, and they don't spend more. Sometimes he'll go in and out 10, not even 15 minutes, but you don't need a lot of time when that relationship is established. They trust him, they know he's there, he's been there for the last 20 years, and there are often other factors outside of that that impact people's ability to stay with the same doctor, whether it's insurance changing or, you know, oftentimes that's usually why people switch doctors, is because the insurance is no longer the same. And it's a tricky situation, but it definitely is possible within the system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so true. I hate to do this, but we're gonna have to start wrapping up. As we do so, Eva, I'll give you the final words here. Any any final words, any way that our listeners can interact with you, more information about what you're doing, and anything you just want to spread the word on about what you're doing at the moment.
Well, thank you for giving me that opportunity. So I am heavily involved with Medicine Forward, and while we're still fine-tuning exactly where this journey is going to be taking us, one thing that will stay true is that we are supporting the patient-doctor relationship flourishing in order to strengthen what currently exists, to transform what needs to change. But it really, the reason I love Medicine Forward is because their mission is my mission in life. It is relationships that are going to make all the difference. And it begins with the doctor-patient relationship, whether it be through or for that relationship. And I do want to say caveat, like, we're not ignoring other clinicians here. It's obviously anyone who provides clinical care. We're just talking about the doctor-patient relationship in particular. So I do want to encourage anyone to check out medicineforward.org. We have lots of different events and experiences that we'll be cultivating together, and it's all about partnership. It's actually not going to be just about like what Medicine Forward is doing. It's actually going to be focused on what are we doing with other individuals and organizations together, and also through both voices of doctors and patients, not just patients or not just physicians. And really my message, I've been trying to think about what is the best way to really encompass all that I care about and I'm trying to put out there. And I think it really is coming down to human connection. There is no greater investment than yourself, your relationship to self, and therefore your relationship to others. We are nothing without the people in our lives and the experiences we have with ourselves and those people. And so if you're considering therapy, if you're considering a coach, I recommend both. Maybe not necessarily at the same time, but those are ways that you can learn more about yourself, be more comfortable with yourself, have relationship with yourself, and also be able to connect and be with others in your life, and also the endeavors that you have. There's so much more that's available to us when we are able to connect with ourselves and others. So really that's connection. Go seek it.
Yes, beautifully said.
I love
Yeah.
that. And I'm a new member of Medicine Forward as of this week. So
Oh, yay.
definitely encourage everyone to get involved. I think it's fantastic. And I love that. G, any last words before we wrap it up?
No, this has been wonderful. Thank you, Eva, for sharing all your wisdom and your experience. And thank you for translating your experience as a patient and all the different trials you went to into a purpose that can really, I can already see it helped a lot of people. Definitely.
That means the world to me. Thank you.
Ditto to what Dr. G did. Eva, thank you. This has been amazing. And everyone watching, this has been another episode of the Upward Spiral podcast. Thank you so much.